Joining us now is Scott Rasmussen, the number one pollster in the United States. Every day, go to scottrasmussen.com. That's scottrasmussen.com. He's got a number of the day today, too. He's going to talk about the number one. But Scott Rasmussen started this whole thing on War Room impeachment. He was the one that started it when he got on my show and he said 50% of voters want the president impeached and removed from office. And we freaked out. And so I went to Steve Bannon and told him about it. And Steve Bannon started War Room Impeachment, heard every day live on the John Fredericks Radio Network, 9 to 10 a.m. And of course, if you miss it live, you can find it on our YouTube page daily. He's also up on Stitcher and all that stuff. Joining us now, Scott Rasmussen. Scott, great to have you, man.
It's good to be with you, John.
What do you think is going to happen today in Virginia? Tomorrow, I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say, not much is going to happen today in Virginia. A lot of last-minute campaigning. I heard your analysis. I think you're right on the mark. It's going to be a good day for the Democrats. The question is how good? And as always, in close races, that comes down to turnout.
Right, and my concern is I know the Democrats are going to turn out. I mean, they've spent a lot of money.
Yeah.
And they have a simple message in Virginia, which is basically Trump sucks, guns. That's it. I mean, that's been their message, and it's been working. Yep.
And, a lot of that has to do with the changing demographics of Virginia and the expansion of the federal government, bringing an entirely different flavor to the northern part of the state. And by the way, in some other elections, I know it's hard to imagine, but there is a world beyond Virginia, but we're going to see similar messaging all about Donald Trump in races for governor of Kentucky and Mississippi and then a little later in Louisiana. What we're finding is in today's political world, everything is defined by a reaction to President Trump, whether it's good or bad.
And, you look at the stakes in Virginia and so many issues on the table, and it's hard to imagine that we're going to have a second cycle driven by whether you like Trump's tweets or not. It's almost mind-boggling to me that all the issues that are going to affect Virginia if the Democrats win and they have some radical proposals on the table, these aren't just concepts or ideology. They've already put in the bills. I mean, they're repeal right to work, third term, late term abortions, tax increases, get rid of the tax cut they have, etc. It goes on and on and on. But people are just voting based on the fact that they like or don't like Trump.
Yeah, politics has become very much of a team sport. There was a time when you and I were a little bit younger when it wasn't unusual to have one party win the electoral college votes of a state and the other party pick up a Senate seat. That's virtually gone today. The alignment of states and the way they vote for president and for senators, with rare exceptions, it's the same states. People are either for or against. And by the way, a lot of people, it's not so much that they're for the Republicans as against the Democrats, or it's not they're for the Democrats but against the Republicans. And I think it's become a simple defining issue for a lot of people. And remember, you and I have talked many times, while the listeners to your show and others get really into the details of politics and they're wrapped up in this and they know specific issues that are out there, most Americans aren't paying close attention to politics, especially in these off-year elections, especially in times when they are state and local elections. And so they look for clues, and the clues are which team are you on.
And so as you look at your impeachment polling, now that we've had an impeachment vote and it's going to be a little bit more of an open process than it was, we're not quite sure how much, but some of it, what has your recent results shown?
Well, look, the reality is we're now in I think you and I talked about this once before, it's a Kavanaugh-type situation. Again, the team sport aspect. Democrats overwhelmingly are ready to impeach and remove President Trump from office. But they're kind of stalled at the 50% level overall, not just in my polling. I noticed on top of the Drudge today there are 3 polls listed, 49, 49, and 51. percent that want to see the president removed from office over impeachment. But this is a number that right now is early in the process, and it's a very partisan response. Independent voters are pretty evenly divided, and there is room for it to swing in either direction. But just like we're never going to see that number who support impeachment removal fall below the mid to low 40% range, because the Democratic base has been ready for this for well over 3 years.
So basically, is the 50% number as a pollster, Scott Rasmussen, is that alarming to you?
If you're the Trump administration, it should be very alarming to you, because it just suggests that half the country does not see you as their legitimately accepted president. What it also tells you is that next year is likely to be dominated by the Senate trial and impeachment, and then the election in November, and nothing else will get done. It's just those issues are going to dominate because they are so central. Now, the Democrats also have reason to be concerned about these numbers because they are so even. If they slip back a little bit, which could very well happen, the Trump administration has not been aggressively responding to a lot of these charges early on. There has been some pushback on process, but also there's been a reluctance among many Republicans to accept the numbers. When we talked about 50% of voters being in favor of impeaching and removing the president, I got a lot of response from Trump supporters saying it's fake news, it's fake polls. Why do you make up such lies? You have to accept that this is out there. For the Democrats, the risk is when the pushback comes, as other evidence comes to the fore and begins to create some doubts, what happens, especially in the 31 districts that are represented by a Democrat today, but were carried by President Trump. What happens in those districts? That could give the Republicans a chance to pick up some seats. There's also a really interesting batch of polls out today from the New York Times in some battleground states, and the biggest takeaway from that, other than the fact that all the states are very competitive, is that they report the Democrats have made no inroads into working-class voters. There has been this hope and expectation on the left that President Trump's tweets and behaviors would push away some of those people that supported him 4 years ago. And it's clear that some of them don't like those tweets and other things. But given a choice between that or some of the Democrats that are leading in the race for the nomination, these voters are okay with President Trump.
So should that be concerning for the Democrats, Scott Rasmussen?
Absolutely. You mentioned earlier the number of the day. The number is 1. 1 year from today, election 2020 will be over. We'll know what's happened. But 1 year is a lifetime in politics. And we know, because of 2016 and because of a number of races in 2018 that went the Democrats' way, that small changes can make a huge difference in electoral outcomes. Had the Republican turnout been just a couple of points higher in 2018, the Democrats wouldn't have control of Congress the way they do right now. Mm-hmm. So when you look out over the next year and you look at the polling on impeachment and you look at the fact that 2/3 of people say they want Congress to focus on things other than impeachment, if this turns out to look like if it comes to be perceived by independent voters as a witch hunt and politically motivated rather than a serious impeachment inquiry, well, in that case, the Democrats are likely to pay a price for this. Mm-hmm. Both sides have reason to be concerned because we're just talking about small changes on the margins. It is going to be a lot of messaging, and ultimately it will get caught up in some other issues. Healthcare will be a big issue. The economy will be a big issue. But they'll all be framed in this discussion about impeachment.
John Fredericks Radio Network, Trucking the Truth Across America. I'm your Godzilla of the Truth. We're with Scott Rasmussen, America's #1 political pollster. He is spot on almost virtually 100% of the time. The most accurate pollster out there. Go to scottrasmussen.com. Sign up for his daily newsletter. It's free. Don't want to miss that. That's the first thing I read when it pops up. So go to scottrasmussen.com. Scott, got a couple more questions. Got to go to a quick word from our sponsors. When I get back, we're going to ask Scott about what is the long-term picture here. Is there Trump fatigue, and should we be concerned about that? Even from his supporters, are they just getting fatigued by this whole thing? We're going to find out when I get back.
Don't touch that dial. You found your home of the truth.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
With the best analysis in America.
You can't handle the truth.
And now back to the John Fredericks Show.
Yeah, you got him. You're back with Scott Rasmussen. Go to scottrasmussen.com. Scott, one of the things I'm concerned about amongst even the Trump base is just Trump fatigue. I had a couple people tell me this past weekend, I'm just getting tired of this. It's like nonstop, 24 hours a day. The tweets, the fights, the this, the that. When do we just get back to normalcy? Is that a concern?
It's hard to know. I hear the same thing. Anecdotally, I hear lots of stories about that, and I hear people talking about it that I know that are Trump supporters, and they're thinking, this is just even when we really are unhappy with the fight, what the other side is saying, it's just the constant fight is wearing people down. However, when you look at the polling data, his job approval is holding steady. All of the indications are that nothing has really changed, and it may be that some people are tuning out a little bit more. But when we get to next October, the question will then be a choice between, do you want more of this or do you want what, say, Elizabeth Warren is offering? And that will answer the question. I will say that in polling right now, it looks Republicans are as enthusiastic about voting in 2020 as Democrats. There is no enthusiasm gap. And that's perhaps an indication that while the fatigue is there, the desire to stop fighting has not gone away.
Scott, let me ask you a question that is not really related to one of your polls, but I just want to get your take on it. You poll the Democratic field. Biden still has a lead.
Yep.
A lot of people look at Biden and they're like, my God, I just can't see this guy winning, which is speculated. Talk of a Hillary Clinton reemergence. Is this possible?
Well, I've been around long enough. I won't say it's impossible, but I find it extraordinarily unlikely. I think Joe Biden is a weak front runner. I think he is likely to be in trouble in Iowa. And if he loses badly in Iowa, his support in what he perceives right now of his firewall state in South Carolina will fade. And bluntly, if Biden finishes in third or fourth, the way some polls are suggesting in Iowa right now, we will learn on that day that he will not be the Democratic nominee. What that does for the rest of the field is unclear because right now so many people say that Biden is their first choice, that it would free up an enormous chunk of voters for the other candidates to fight over.
So if Biden goes down, you don't really know what's going to happen.
No, what you would normally expect is another more moderate candidate, Senator Klobuchar or somebody, or Mayor Buttigieg, who might begin to attract some of those voters. But I'm not sure that's the right model. We're in a situation right now. The top three candidates are considered to be Biden, Warren, and Sanders. And I believe that Warren and Sanders will pick up a significant portion of Biden's votes. And there will be room for one more, in that case, one more person who comes out of Iowa with a little bit of momentum. Don't ask me who that person will be. There have been surprises before. But it's a little bit of an unsettled field.
Well, what is your polling showing in Iowa right now, Scott?
We haven't done an Iowa poll specifically, but looking at all of the other Iowa polling that's out there, at best for Joe Biden, he is in a toss-up situation. At worst, he is trailing and losing. And reports on the ground are that other candidates are running circles around him with their campaign organizations.
That's what I've heard the same thing. But yet in the big poll that you just did that came out just a couple days ago, Democratic primary voters. Biden at 34%, Warren 18,
Yeah.
Sanders 16. So Biden, that's 130, Scott. That's a
But-
pretty big number.
Yeah, but on top of that, a majority of a majority of people who are potential Democratic primary voters say they can that they're likely to change their mind before they actually cast their vote. These are very soft indications of support. And let me tell you something that's happened in prior primary seasons, and this is really important to understand. Voters understand the dynamics when they go into the polls. So if we come out of, we go into Iowa, and it looks like the top contenders are Buttigieg and Warren. I'm just making this up. If those are the top two that one of them might win, what you'll begin to see is people will begin to peel away from lower-tier candidates and vote for one of them or the other. So those two will have an elevated level of support, and then it will other candidates will lose. Then when you go into New Hampshire and voters begin to see who the top two are, or the top three, if it's very close, again, you'll see a different set of candidates begin to fall off. And so these voters who are saying they might change their mind are going to be watching what's happening in the campaign. They're going to be aware of the dynamics, and so that leaves it wide open for plenty of changes. Remember, Rudy Giuliani led the Republican polling just like Joe Biden is this year. When Giuliani ran back in 2008, he was ahead the entire year ahead of the campaign, and he was out of the race by the end of January. That could very well happen to Joe Biden.
Well, his support seems to be a mile wide and an inch deep, and so I don't think he's going to finish 1, 2, 3 in Iowa. I think he's going to finish fourth. I don't really know how you recover from that. I really don't.
And especially when you're in that position.
Yeah.
You know,
it's kind of like Howard Dean, right? Remember, Dean had the lead, and he went to Iowa's campaign in the final days, imploded for whatever reason, and then he could never really recover from that. He was out by South Carolina. I think the same thing happens.
Yeah, I think that seems right. If Joe Biden, well, I'll start with the simple thing. If Joe Biden finishes third or worse, and especially if it's not a particularly close third or worse, then he is done. We know that in 2008 on the Democratic side that Barack Obama surprisingly won in Iowa, a much closer election than we're talking about here potentially. And that slight victory in Iowa is what led him to the Democratic nomination and to the White House. It shifted the calculations. So again, if Biden finishes third or worse, I think you can safely assume he's done. And then you have huge fights going on. And we normally talk in terms of, well, then you go to New Hampshire and then South Carolina and Nevada. But right on the same day of the Iowa caucuses, early voting begins in California. And so there will be a lot of evaluating what's happening in that process. We will have a very clear picture by mid-March because 2/3 of the Democratic delegates are selected in the first 5 or 6 weeks of the campaign.
Scott Rasmussen, great analysis. Great to have you back. Go to scottrasmussen.com. Sign up for his newsletter.